I'm really, really, really pleased to be here today and super honored to be able to share the stage with David Crystal and Ben Crystal. In my mind, they are your main act of today. I'm just the warm-up act. I'm just the starting act. Will approached me to say that he wanted me to do a presentation about English through the ages, something about history or what we can learn from history about English language teaching, communication. And I immediately thought I have to talk about rhetoric. Why? Because rhetoric is one of the oldest field of study in human history. And I'm not exaggerating because we can see that it goes as far back as 2400 BC. It used to be in the Western world one of the three ancient arts of discourse. So the three being grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So if you lived back in the ancient times, say in Greece or even in the UK, not so much the ancient times, rhetoric was a subject you would probably study at university. And this went on for centuries. It is often associated back then, and even so now, with politics. We've heard expressions like, oh, it's all just rhetoric, meaning that, it's just all persuasive talk and someone trying to influence our opinions, but there's not much substance in it. We use a phrase like it's all just rhetoric to kind of devalue what someone is saying or someone's presentation. We have expressions like it's just a rhetorical question, meaning a question that doesn't really need an answer. Rhetoric today is often associated with style, with influencing techniques, and not so much the content and substance of it. And I want to show you today how rhetoric goes beyond style. In fact, this was widely debated way back in ancient Greece. So you had your original Greek philosophers talking about rhetoric in terms of discourse, of style, of how you present your tone of voice, the way you pause in speech. And then you had the sophists who came up against the original philosophers and said, it's not all style without substance. Surely, if you want to be persuasive, if you want to convince someone of something, you've got to have content. You've got to have substance. It's not just how we say it, it's what we say. And I was thinking about how this really relates to English language teaching. For years, and even now, we're teaching students to use accurate grammar, accurate vocabulary. We teach them fancy idioms and stylistic devices, hedging language, to help them sound more like someone who speaks English as a first language, to sound more precise, to sound more accurate, to pass exams. But do we look at the content of what they say? When our students stand up in front of a classroom giving a presentation, we might make notes on, error correction on grammar points and vocabulary usage and idiomatic usage. We might reformulate their vocabulary, but do we look and comment on, give feedback on the content of what they're actually saying to you? So, what is rhetoric? Perhaps you might have guessed from my introduction that rhetoric is the art of persuasive communication. It is the effective use of language, which we are in the business of, and arguments to inform, persuade, or motivate. In other words, it is effective communication in order to influence someone's opinions, to inform them of what we know, or to motivate someone, a call to action. Do you recognize these people on your screen? If you do use the chat field and tell me who they are and what do they have in common? What do these four people have in common? All right, Rosinta, you're the first to answer. Yes, absolutely. Right, so we are recognizing Martin Luther King from the left, and you've got Winston Churchill on the right. Paola, absolutely. Alicia, Oprah Winfrey is right next to Martin Luther King. And who's the fourth person who's in between Churchill and Oprah Winfrey? Does anybody recognize her? No, not Ellen. Let's see if anyone gets this. Absolutely. Yes, Kong, you said Brene Brown. A few people coming in. Vicky, Naeem, Brene Brown is the correct answer. Brene Brown is an amazing speaker. This photo was taken from her Netflix documentary. If you subscribe to Netflix, do watch it. You'll see that she is an incredible speaker, able to move and empower people. She speaks a lot about vulnerability and empathy for others and connecting with people. Definitely worth a watch. Now, what do they all have in common? Fabio, you're absolutely right. They all have the gift of the gab. What does that mean, the gift of the gab? They are public speakers. They are amazing speakers, great speakers, good speakers, eloquent speakers. Yes, being articulate. Yes, being articulate is part of having the gift of the gab. And I would say the speakers coming right after me, Ben and David Crystal, definitely have the gift of the gab. Now, let's move away from thinking about famous people like Brene Brown and Oprah Winfrey and think about someone you know personally who is incredibly persuasive. Who do you know? Could be someone in your family, someone in your workplace, one of your students even. Who do you know who is incredibly persuasive? And then I would like you to think about the skills that person has. What makes them incredibly persuasive? When you think of someone who is really, really persuasive, what skills do they have that make them so persuasive? So we've got Steve Jobs. So someone you know, unless you do know Steve Jobs. Oh, thank you. Someone said me. My mom, my son. Okay. So they use rhetorical questions. They know what they're talking about. Thank you, Paulito. Determination. Okay. Many politicians, absolutely, which is why rhetoric is often talked about in line with politics, right? Children asking for presents. My daughter, they were okay. So self-confidence is a big one. I got a few people saying self-confidence, expertise, life experience, honesty. I like that. People who are gentle and calm, definitely not me then. Clarity, I love that. And as you can see, some of this is what we do with our students, right? Teaching them to speak clearly, to speak with confidence. But some of it's also to do with life skills, like, honesty, empathy for others. Yes, absolutely. Being knowledgeable of the content. So not all style and no substance, but actually having that substance as well. All right, we'll come back to this in a moment. But we can agree that someone who is good at rhetoric is someone who is good at debates, public speaking, and persuading others. And what they are good at doing in general is using language successfully, effectively, to persuade and communicate successfully. But we're not only talking about the style of the language and accurate use of grammar, fancy idioms, alliteration, metaphors, not just that, but we're also talking about the substance, the content of what they're saying. Are they constructing logical arguments? Now, we often think about rhetoric in terms of teaching students to speak, to convey a message, to inform, to persuade. And the same thing kind of happens in ELT classrooms, doesn't it? We focus a lot more on those productive skills like speaking and writing. But what about listening? What about being on the receiving end of other people's arguments? Now, if you think about a debate, when you are good at rhetoric, you're not just good at coming up with your own arguments, but you're also good at spotting fallacies in other people's arguments. And that requires critical thinking, able to spot cognitive, logical fallacies. And one thing I like doing is using adverts, print ads, to get students practice in spotting those fallacies in those persuasive arguments that they see in advertisements. And we'll come to that shortly. But we can't talk about print ads without talking about this guy, Aristotle. Now, Aristotle came after the sophists. After a lot of debate has been had about what rhetoric is, is it about the style or is it about the content? And Aristotle was definitely on the side of content. A person who is good at rhetoric has to have substance. He has to have good ways of persuading people. And he came up with these three core means of persuasion. So we have ethos, pathos, and logos. You might have heard these expressions before. Ethos focuses on authority, credibility. You might have heard some TED speakers start their talks by talking about their experience, their qualification, why they are the people who should be telling you this message. And that is ethos. They're persuading you to believe them because of their expertise, because of their qualifications. You should trust me because I am credible, and therefore you should believe everything I say to you. That's ethos. Pathos is all about emotions, feelings, getting someone to feel about, to feel what you're telling them, to engage their emotions can make your message a lot more persuasive. And then we have logos, or logic, giving them statistics, hard facts, showing them, why, the factual reasons, the logical reasons why they should agree with you, why they should be convinced by your argument. Breaking it down into these three means of persuasion, these three persuasive techniques, ethos, pathos, and logos, can help our students communicate and influence in a much more effective way. Now, I promised you earlier that I would show you some print ads of it doing exactly this. So let's have a look at the first one. Would you say this uses ethos, pathos, or logos? Now, I get that most ads these days use all three. A good rhetorician is able to use ethos, pathos, and logos, and it overlaps to try and sell you a convincing argument. But which of those three is this using most of? Perhaps you recognize some of these people in these print ads. You have David Beckham selling you a watch, and George Clooney selling you coffee, and then you have Julia Roberts selling you perfume. Because they are who they are, we could argue that they are authorities in a way. People trust them because they are well known and perhaps even well liked by the general public. When you see George Clooney, you feel like you know him. And so you start to trust what he's saying. So if George Clooney likes this coffee, it's probably good. I would go with ethos, right? Using celebrity endorsement to add credibility, to add weight, to add authority to that message. Now, we don't just use celebrities to add weight to an advertising message. We might also add weight by association. So we have here IBM associating themselves with the European Space Agency and therefore adding credibility to their product. We're all about advanced technology. We're all about helping the environment, and that adds credibility to them, to their product, to their company, and their branding. We also see one here. You might have seen this before. It is Oral-B's very, very long time running ad motto, most used by dentists all over the world, most used by dentists in the UK, the #1 toothpaste recommended by dentists, etc., using experts like dentists, doctors to add credibility, authority to that product, and therefore ethos. But yes, May, you're absolutely right. There's some of logos in it. So it's kind of a logical argument, but very, very much ethos, authority. Now, we have to teach students to be careful when they are at the receiving end of these persuasive techniques, because logos can go quite, sorry, not logos, ethos can go quite wrong too. Here we have an ad for cigarettes by doctors who are adding authority and credibility, and then we have one recommended by dentists. Just because something is supposedly recommended by doctors, supposedly recommended by dentists, does not make it immediately more credible. We are encouraging students to think critically. We are encouraging students to question, is it really recommended by dentists? Of course, we now know that cigarettes are terrible for you. No doctor or dentist would ever recommend cigarettes. It is about getting students to unpack that message, that persuasive message, so that they are not vulnerable to that overload, tirade of information they're exposed to every day, online, everywhere around them. Another way of using ethos is not just using experts or celebrities, but to use everyday people, people just like you and me. And here we have these ads by Dove, who uses everyday people because there's this feeling that, you know, these guys are like me, and people like those who are like themselves. People like people who are similar to themselves. And so seeing yourself reflected in an ad draws people in. It is ethos in a way, but there's also an element of credibility because they are trying to champion beauty of all kinds. You can be gray, you can be flawed, you can be wrinkled, you are still beautiful. And that gives Dove that sort of kudos, that sort of credibility. And that, again, is ethos. How about this one? Which persuasive technique do you see right here? Is it ethos, pathos, or logos? What do you think? Yes, pathos. Oh, okay, lots of people saying pathos here. Brilliant. Absolutely. So pathos is about generating, inducing, triggering emotions in the person receiving, on the receiving end. So what emotion do you think this ad is trying to induce? What is it getting the viewer to feel looking at this ad? Trust, a pity? Okay. So you're feeling pity for the animal, love for animals. Oh, I like that, Bernadette. Guilt. I really think guilt is a big part of it. It's saying you would care a lot if it was as cute as a panda, but just because the animal isn't as cute as a panda does not mean we should care less for it. So yes, inducing that guilt, empathy, responsibility, care. Yes, absolutely. Brilliant stuff. How about this one? What kind of emotion or feeling is it trying to trigger in the viewer? Now, notice that in the ad just before this, we are looking at cute animals, and here we have cute babies. And a great way of inducing emotions is to use animals and babies, because that, you know, those are kind of surefire ways that your viewer is going to feel something. Here we have empathy, care. The message here is that if you love your child, if you love your baby, you want to protect them. Yes, responsibility. And if you want to protect them, you would use our product because our products keep your children safe. Absolutely. So again, it is using your emotions to convince you to buy their product. How about this one? What emotion is it trying to create within you? So this is a little bit different. Not so much, you know, cutesy feelings of love and care, but fear. Absolutely, Bernadette, spot on. Fear of not declaring your income. This is the revenue and customs. So these are the people that collect your taxes. How about this one? What feelings does this add? So Pedigree is a pet food product, right? It sells pet food, dog food, cat food, etc. We've got loss, affection, care as well. Lonely, I like that, Tatia. Loneliness. It is, yes, it's bringing up those very melancholic feeling of loneliness and coupled with friendship and happiness, right? Do you want to be lonely or do you want to be happy? Do you want to be, you know, with a faithful partner? Absolutely. Brilliant. How about this one? What feelings does this bring about in you? So a very, very different ad from the last one we just saw. It's not about melancholy. It's not about friendship and loneliness. It's about hunger, yes, desire, food, gluttony. It triggers that hunger, doesn't it? Greed. It makes you want to eat unhealthily. It's almost kind of going, yeah, you can treat yourself and pamper yourself, have that guilty pleasure. You don't have to always eat healthily. Yes, interesting, isn't it? Now let's have a look at this one. So we've got two car ads here. Both of them are using pathos in a similar way. What feelings is it trying to generate in the viewer? I particularly like the one on the left. I think it's a very blatant use of pathos, suggesting Power, luxury. Yes, absolutely. If you buy our product, you can fulfill your dreams. Exactly. You can live the life that you've been dreaming of. So it's appealing to that side of you, that self-fulfilled or unfulfilled side of you. And it is absolutely manipulation. In fact, all these ads are manipulation, Eduardo. And this is what we're trying to show students, right? How to unpack these ads so that we can understand the techniques they're using to persuade us. And once we're able to understand the techniques, the manipulation that's going on, can we then help students to develop that critical thinking skill and to help them to be much more judicious and careful with the messages they receive, the tons and tons of messages they receive every single day, every single minute? What emotion is this one trying to create within you? How do you feel seeing this? Zoe, love, maybe? Humor, I'm flying Jack. Yes, Rosinta. Freedom, okay. I mean, if you've seen the Titanic, you know that this ad is a nod to that famous movie. But the fact that there's a bird in the face of the female protagonist suggests that it is trying to be funny. Absolutely. Funny, laughter, joy is always a great way of engaging people's emotions. Because when you get people to feel, in particular, when you get people to laugh, you get them to remember the product. They remember the context, they remember the product. And we can see this in multiple ads using humor, using fun, amusement, laughter to make sure, to ensure that you remember their product. Now, here we have one by Volkswagen, which kind of uses humor, but at the same time, it's using a little bit of logos as well. It's using logic to say, this is why we're really good. We can park your car just like this porcupine. So humor, feelings, but a bit of logos, logic as well. Now, again, helping students to be aware when they are being manipulated. We see these ads also using pathos. You'll be happier if you buy this product, or creating feelings like FOMO, fear of missing out. Everyone's getting this product, but there's only 5 minutes left to go. If you don't buy it now, you'll never be able to partake in this happiness, right? Getting students to understand these manipulation techniques and think critically about it. Here we have another cigarette ad, that false message that, if you smoke this cigarette, the girls will fall in love with you. Again, get students to unpack the false messaging that is happening through these adverts, or the fact that this razor is so safe that you will pass it to a baby, right? Let's unpack this. Let's think critically about how they are trying to manipulate us into buying that product. Now, here we have a slightly different ad here. Which of the three persuasive techniques is being used here? Is it ethos, logos, or pathos? Logos, absolutely. So they're throwing numbers at you, they're throwing statistics at you, and hopefully you will believe those numbers. When it looks scientific, when there are lots of numbers, we accept it, don't we? We just assume those numbers are accurate. And these numbers seem to tell us that this product contains less fat, less calories than the other products, and therefore we can eat more of it. Now, we see that a lot in some of these ads. Here is the pet food ad again, but this time it's using logos to show us the components, the ingredients in the pet food, and all the amazing things this pet food can do. And again, if you see, the use of scientific symbols, scientific diagrams to make that seem more credible, to make it seem more, like an expert's created this, and therefore, forcing you or persuading you to trust them more because it looks so scientific. This ad, however, takes a slightly different take on logos. It's telling you everyone buys these potatoes. And if everyone buys it, then it must be a good product. And do you see that logical fallacy there? Do you see how that is false thinking? If everyone's doing it, then it must be the right thing to do, which we all know is not true. But this ad uses that logical fallacy, right? Everyone's buying it. It must be good. Are you buying it too? Now, here are some examples of the use of logos, but in a very misguided way, in a very manipulative way. We've got, doctors and laboratory tests tells us that Coca-Cola is good for children. So give your babies Coca-Cola. Now we know that would be a terrible message to send out to parents. Today we know that now, but again, using that logic of let me throw you some science and hope that you believe me, and buy Coca-Cola for your children, or perhaps eat more sugar. So here we have another logos-based ad that is suggesting that sugar is good for you and that if you eat sugar, it would be good for your diet, which I hope you're all laughing at your computers right now because we know that is false news. Again, showing the students these ads, getting them to engage those critical thinking skills and getting them to understand how they're being manipulated by ethos, pathos, or logos persuasive techniques. Now, when we talk about rhetoric, we often think about these guys, right? The ancient Greeks and the sophists. Or we might be thinking about these guys, the ancient Roman philosophers. Now, one of these ancient Roman philosophers is quite key to the development of rhetoric and the teaching of rhetoric in the Western world. And it's this person here. His name is Cicero. And Cicero came up with 5 canons of rhetoric, which I think very nicely sums up the Western world's take, the Western world's point of view of what rhetoric should be about. And here are the 5 canons. We've got 1, invention. So what is the topic? What, inventing, creating content for your speech or for your persuasive speech. Then it's arrangement. How are you organizing it? What's in your introduction paragraph? What's in your conclusion? Then it's the style you're using. What kind of idiomatic expressions are you using? Are you pausing in the right moments? Are you using the right intonation? Then it's about committing the speech to memory and then how you're delivering it. So these are your Western canons of rhetoric. Now, why do I say Western? So when I was doing my research for this talk, I became extremely excited when I found out that rhetoric did not get talked about only in the Western world. In fact, these guys here, the ancient Egyptians, talked about rhetoric way back in 2200 to 1500 BC. There were scriptures found that showed proof that rhetoric was highly valued in ancient Egypt. They held eloquent speaking in high esteem, and they used to train young men in the art of rhetoric so that they could become scribes and officials. Now, this is where there is some difference between the way the ancient Greeks and Romans taught rhetoric and talked about rhetoric, the Western world, and the way the ancient Egyptians talked about rhetoric. They talked a lot about that balance between eloquence and wise silence. Now, notice in Cicero's 5 canons of rhetoric and in Aristotle's and in the Greek philosophers, no one talked about silence. So I found this incredible article about rhetoric in ancient Egypt, and it broke down the teachings of rhetoric into these 5 canons. 1, silence, knowing when to speak and when not to speak, right? Which ties in with timing. Restraint. How often do you hear something and then you get emotional about it? You have an emotional reaction and then you respond or you react without thinking. Being able to restrain yourself and think about things logically and not just respond emotionally. And I suppose that ties back into those adverts that you just saw. When you watch an advertising message, a persuasive message, training our students to hold back those emotions and think about it logically, unpack it logically. Am I being manipulated? Am I reacting emotionally? And then we have fluency and truthfulness, which a few of you mentioned. Good speakers have the ability to at least to seem honest and truthful and true to themselves, authentic, right? So knowing when not to speak is essential. And it is also very respected rhetorical knowledge. Now, I looked at more recent research from Oakwood and found this. These, from the research done, are the top factors of influencing. Now, when we talk about top factors of top skills of an influencer, top skills of a persuasive person, we always think about charisma and charm and the way they speak and how well they speak, you know, the use of language, idioms, style, etc., intonation. What really surprised me about this pie chart is that 20% of this pie chart says attending. In fact, the largest, most important skill of a persuasive person is the ability to listen, the ability to attend to their conversation partner, to ask the right questions, to allow silence when silence is needed, and to really be there, not holding a mobile phone while listening, not, thinking about your response while listening, but to genuinely listen. And that is one of the key skills of a persuasive, good rhetorician. How fascinating. Now, if you study negotiation and influencing, you know that there are one way of looking at it, one framework is to look at push influencing and pull influencing. Push influencers try to push their opinions onto you. They try to say, this is what I believe in. You should believe in this too, because here are the advantages, here are the disadvantages. Bang, this is in your face. This is known as push influencing. Pull influencing, however, it's more about trying to engage the listener, to ask the right questions, so that the listener comes to those conclusions by themselves, to pull them in and get that commitment from them in order for them to buy in to the opinion or the product that you're trying to sell. Now, I thought this orange quarrel gave a great example of pull influencing in a way. I'm not sure if you heard about the orange quarrel, but here's the situation, right? You've got a little boy and a little girl, and they're arguing over an orange. Now, let's do this as a role play in the classroom, okay? In pairs, student A, you're the boy, student B, you're the girl. You have an orange and you both want it. You have 3 minutes. Go figure out how you're going to do this. How are you going to come to a conclusion? So since we can't do this in pairs, how about we use the chat field? Some ideas of what you might say to your partner if you were doing this role play. How would you try and get that orange? What would you say to them? Okay, Rebecca, very diplomatic. Can we cut it into you have half, I have half? I like that, Fabio. I haven't been eating for days and I need to survive. I need vitamin C or I will die. So again, inducing that pathos, that emotion in our conversation partner, right? Feel sorry for me. I'm dying. Yes. Offer them something. I like that sort of bit of logos going on there. Okay, I'll give you something if you let me have that orange. Okay, ladies first, I'm very gentlemanly. It's rotten. Oh, I like that, Natalia. It's rotten. Don't touch it. It's mine. Oh, Palito, absolutely a business person there. Can we discuss our terms, please? Yes, playing the victim, a lot of that going on in the chat field. Make the juice and share. Wonderful, lots of great strategies. And I've done this with 8-year-olds, and I've found that they've come up with some very interesting strategies too, not unlike what you've suggested. These kids come up with some really good strategies of getting that orange. Now, William Ury, in one of his talks, showed us with the Harvard negotiation technique that he created how we can possibly resolve this orange quarrel in a much more effective way. Let's have a look at this video.
I'd like to retell a familiar tale called The Orange Quarrel to illustrate what we mean by beyond win-win. This story is adapted from Getting to Yes by Fisher and Ury at Harvard University. It was a rather explosive situation because two children were using adversarial methods that ignored the interests of the other party. Both children wanted the only orange, and they were heading for a lose-lose situation, destroyed orange, or at best, win-lose if one child overpowered the other for the whole orange. Fortunately, a clever mediator came along with a good idea. Jenny cut, Joey choose. This was a good solution and a win-win solution compared to what could have happened in an all-out fight. All things being equal, this seemed like a pretty fair solution. Both children got 50% of what they wanted. But it turns out that we can do even better than this when we recognize that there are two important objectives that help us achieve superior agreements: fairness and efficiency. Divide the benefits fairly and don't leave value on the table. The children in this conflict were using adversarial methods, assuming a one-dimensional model of negotiations. Both children wanted the whole orange, and the problem was that if one was to get more, the other had to get less. The first step in solving this problem is to relabel these scales. Instead of thinking that each child wants 100% of the orange, consider rather that each child wants to become 100% satisfied. Now we can take these scales and reorient them so that we're viewing the case in multidimensional satisfaction space. Now it's no longer necessarily true that one party has to lose when another one gains. Recall the solution in our previous scenario. We did achieve our fairness objective. Both parties got 50% of what they wanted, but when we plot this solution on the graph, we see that there may be room for improvement. To further explore this, we dig a little deeper into our bag of interest-based principles and ask each child why they want the orange. It turns out that Jenny isn't interested in eating the orange. She wants to bake a cake that calls for the peels of exactly one orange. Joey, on the other hand, can never get enough oranges to eat, but always throws the peels into the waste bin. So now you know the optimal solution. Give Jenny all the peels and Joey all the fruit. They both get 100% of what they wanted, which achieves our efficiency objective.
Who would have thought that the best way of influencing someone is to get to know your partner, to ask questions and find out what they are interested in? Because without understanding context, without understanding your partner, you can never truly be persuasive. Communication is at the core of everything we do. It is at the core of us teaching English to our students, but it is at the core of society. It is at the core of politics. And we can help students develop better communication skills, not just better grammar, better vocabulary, but better communication skills. And part of this is not just about style, but it is also about substance. It is also about the use of language to communicate effectively. It's about critical thinking, listening attentively, knowing when to speak and when not to speak, and when to share your point of view. Being aware of your own emotional reactions and managing them, not emotionally reacting and then regretting having reacted. And, like the Egyptians would say, silence, knowing when to speak, and asking the right questions, as we saw in the Orange Quarrel. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to take any questions.
Hi, Chia.
Hello,
Can you
hi,
hear me?
Will.
Hi, thank you so much. What a talk.
Thank
Absolutely
you for
amazing.
having me.
I love the end. I just love that video, the of the orange and the disagreement and how to solve it. It was just so poignant, and it just delivers the message that you're trying to send so vividly, doesn't it?
Yes, so it's very much based on the Harvard negotiation technique, which is also called beyond win-win. So we often talk about compromising, but what they're saying is compromising is not enough, because compromising often results in both parties being only half satisfied or partially satisfied. And it's about, getting everyone satisfied, 100% satisfied. And the only way to do that is getting to know and making that human connection with your conversation partner. And Stephen Covey once said, trust is the glue of life and is the foundation. Trust is the foundation of everything we do. And so surely being a good rhetorician, being a good communicator involves making that human connection with our partners and building relationships, building trust, and listening, really listening to them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chia. I think we're gonna move on, if that's okay. That's William Ury. I'm just going to put it in there. I think I spelled it wrong. William U-R-Y, right? Is that right?
Yes, William Ury. So Ury and Fisher, who wrote the book Getting to Yes. William Ury also has 2 wonderful TED Talks to watch. And you can find the Orange Quarrel on YouTube. Just search Orange Quarrel.
Thank you so much, Chia. Amazing. All right, well, time for you to have a break, I think, yet again. Thanks again, Chia. Have a nice day.